Hello, everyone. I am ZHAO Chuang. Today, let's get to know Qichuan the Tuojiangosaurus. Tuojiangosaurus is a stegosaurian dinosaur that lived in Sichuan Province, China, during the Jurassic period. It is a very peculiar animal. When people first discovered Tuojiangosaurus, they found that its bony plates were very unusual in shape of pointed triangles, which made it look very recognizable. Because only a few stegosaurians discovered worldwide at that time, there were not many references for people. The most famous one is the genus of Stegosaurus from North America. The unearthed Tuojiangosaurus shows a noticeable difference from the dinosaurs of the Stegosaurus genus. The bony plates of Stegosaurus were broad and huge, while those of Tuojiangosaurus were quite narrow. Although the fossils of the bony plates were collected incompletely, people still speculated that it had more bony plates arranged on the back. Next, let's look at the detailed characteristics of each part of Tuojiangosaurus. The collected skull fossils of Tuojiangosaurus are preserved in poor condition. However, people have still inferred that it had a slender shape, which was different from the very short, ankylosaurus-like skulls of the earlier Gigantospinosaurus or Hurangosaurus that were also found in Sichuan Province. The skull of Tuojiangosaurus was relatively elongated, closer to that of Stegosaurids. There might be some lumpy bumps on the top and side of the skull, just like some Stegosaurids. This suggests that when alive, this part probably corresponded to large plates, resembling crocodiles covering the top of its head. There is a beak on the lower jaw at the front of its mouth. Almost all stegosaurian fossils found so far only represent a beak on the lower jaw, and no beak on the upper jaw. This triggers two different arguments. Some scholars believed that, when a stegosaurian ate, it might use its lower jaw as a shovel, dig up food, swallow the food into its mouth, and then chew with the rear teeth, so there is no beak on the upper jaw. Even if the anterior could bite, it might use the lower jaw directly to grind. With this position, such as the upper tooth chamber, one soft and one rigid to chew food, so no upper teeth were needed. This is somewhat similar to today's cattle, which only have teeth at the front of the lower jaw, but not on the upper jaw. Therefore, many scholars believe that Tuojiangosaurus might only have a beak structure in the lower jaw, but on the contrary, some scholars believed that they also possessed a beak on the upper jaw when alive, which functioned the same as the universally recognized beak. The two beaks hold and cut the food. Although no fossil evidence supports this statement, many preserved mummified fossils of other dinosaurs have verified it. The most famous one is the hadrosaurs. Looking at the skull of hadrosaurs, you will find that their upper jaw is shaped like a duckbill. When people first discovered hadrosaurs, they thought the mouth of this kind of animal was flat like a duck until some fossils with intact soft tissues of the mouth were unearthed later. For example, some exceptionally complete facial fossils of Edmontosaurus preserved the remains of the beak structure of the upper jaw. Although there is no trace on the fossil, a layer of keratin would exist when alive, forming a more pointed beak structure. The beak is a beta-keratin structure, which would decompose after the animal decays. It is a protein that is not easily preserved as a fossil, so the same might also be true for stegosaurians, and they probably had a keratinous beak on the upper jaw when alive. Therefore, when doing restoration, we generally take reference to the latter theory, which is more convincing. After all, stegosaurians were members of ornithischian dinosaurs, and most ornithischian dinosaurs possessed a similar structure. Some were obvious, and some not obvious. This is likely the case for stegosaurians, whose upper beak was not preserved for fossil preservation reasons. In addition, the two nostrils of Tuojiangosaurus were facing forward, which was a bit like those of the early ankylosaurs, unlike the later stegosaurians. Many stegosaurians had their nostrils located backward. Of course, some ankylosaurs, such as the Ankylosaurus, also had their nostrils at the rear. This is because different species have different variations. Tuojiangosaurus had small eyes at the rear of its elongated head. And from this model, you can see it has a very large mouth, resembling a lizard, with a very long oral fissure that goes down to just below the eyes. This shows a relatively well-known statement in the past 2 years, the remodeling of the facial muscles of dinosaurs, in cooperation between some paleontological research institutions and modern medical anatomical institutions. In the past, we thought that this group of dinosaurs might have cheeks to prevent food from falling while eating. But it was controversial at the time because many lizards don't have the food falling outside when they eat. For example, iguanas are also herbivorous, and their food would not fly out during chewing. Another example, the teeth of iguanodon were very similar to those of iguanas, but the early restorations of iguanodon usually made cheeks for them. But in fact, iguanas have the same tooth structure and way of biting but no cheeks. This example can illustrate that herbivorous dinosaurs did not need the cheek structure when they were eating. The study of remodeling the facial muscles of dinosaurs also confirmed this statement. Dinosaurs probably didn't need such a structure, and they probably had an extra lip like a lizard, extending upward and forming a pocket-like shape, with the teeth located lower down. The lower jaw looked like a bowl from the front, and the teeth were in this position. When chewing, the food would stay in the mouth. Stegosaurians probably did the same. And the more convincing point of stegosaurians is that their lower jaw tended to be larger and thicker than the upper jaw, so it was easier to form such a similar structure. Therefore, when doing the restoration, we referred to the latter. Research suggests it had a huge oral fissure and didn't need structures like cheeks. To make a digression, the cheeks are an arguable structure for dinosaurs. Because animals with cheeks today, such as mammals or birds, have no scales on their faces, but soft skin with excellent elasticity. When opening the mouth, this part can stretch in a particular range. But animals like dinosaurs have scales on their faces, and the skin with scales is generally not very elastic, so it is unlikely to have a large area of cheeks, which are not ductile enough. Looking at the underside of the neck of Tuojiangosaurus, you can observe some very large scales, from the throat down to the side of the neck, which is a characteristic of stegosaurians. Although not found in most stegosaurians, such traces are represented in a series of remarkably intact specimens of the genus of Stegosaurus. It is an osteoderm structure that may play a protective role. These plates are reminiscent of animals like the Komodo dragon, which possesses many osteoderms on its neck. Although these osteoderms are invisible in appearance and seem to be scales of larger size, if you use CT or X-ray to take it, you will find that numerous osteoderms form a chain armor-like structure, which effectively protects its neck. Stegosaurian dinosaurs may also be the same. These structures make its neck less vulnerable to attack. Regarding the number of bony plates of Tuojiangosaurus, many early documents mentioned that it had 18 pairs, but this statement has always been controversial. When working on this Tuojiangosaurus model, we inquired many researchers, and finally adopted the view of some scholars, saying that the bony plates on the tail are less than estimated in the past, so we made 15 pairs. Because the tail of this dinosaur was very flexible, if there were too many bony plates on the tail, they would hinder the motion range of the tail. So we made 5 pairs of bony plates on the tail. It had 4 spikes at the end of its tail, but this is less clear in the fossil evidence. Regarding whether there were 4 spikes on its tail, the general restoration also takes a reference to the Stegosaurus from North America. There are a lot of Stegosaurus specimens. We now know that Stegosaurus had 4 spikes at the end of their tail, which stretched outward horizontally. However, Tuojiangosaurus is a stegosaurian dinosaur found in China, a place far away from North America, and they lived in different periods, which may evolve into 2 completely different species, and had significant divergences in morphology. Therefore, when restored, we mainly based on local animals, for example, the Qichuangosaurus, its close relative. Qichuangosaurus had intact tail fossils preserved, which shows its tail was special, unlike that of Stegosaurus with 4 spikes. The fossils represent 5 tail spikes. Because they would appear in pairs, there should be 6 in total, possibly in 3 pairs. Scholars working on Qichuangosaurus research believe that it may actually have 8 spikes, as the rear part of the fossils is not in very good condition. The African Kentrosaurus has 8 spikes on its tail, which could be a reference. but the arrangement of its 8 spikes is not the same as that of Qichuan, in which each spike is far distance located. The 6 tail spikes of Qichuan are arranged closely together. It is not clear whether there are 7th or 8th tail spikes backward. Moreover, the tail spikes of Qichuan were distinguished from the Stegosaurus from North America. They were pointing outward, not horizontally, but vertically, extending upward like this. When we restored this Tuojiangosaurus model, because there was no particular reference, we combined the characteristics of the 2 animals mentioned above. We temporarily made, for tail spikes on its tail, the pointing direction was not as vertically upward as that of Qichuan nor horizontal like that of the North American Stegosaurus. Based on its position in the classification between the 2 animals, we made its tail spikes pointed at a certain oblique angle. Finally, I would like to mention the spines on its shoulders, a structure that also appeared in earlier descriptions. Tuojiangosaurus has once discovered with an exceptionally long spike. At first, people thought it might be located on the tail, but found that this spike was much larger than the caudal vertebrae, and there was no way to put it at the tail end. Similar spikes with a large root have also been found in the remains of African Kentrosaurus. At that time, because only the pelvis of stegosaurians was known to be broad, this spike was placed on the pelvis. So for a long period, in the previous restorations of Kentrosaurus, you would see spikes at both sides of the pelvis. This was an old theory. In the early research of Tuojiangosaurus, scholars once considered whether this spike was on the pelvis. If you read the past memoirs of some researchers, you will find that they had this idea at that time. But later, a critical specimen was unearthed, which was the Gigantospinosaurus. Fossils of Gigantospinosaurus indeed show to such spines but on the shoulders. Therefore, people re-examined the spikes of Tuojiangosaurus, only to realize that they probably were situated on the shoulders. The same problem also happened to Huangosaurus. People first found such spikes on Huangosaurus fossils without knowing where to place them. It wasn't until the appearance of Gigantospinosaurus that people knew the spines of Huangosaurus and Tuojiangosaurus should be on the shoulders. Hence, the existence of shoulder spines of Tuojiangosaurus is not well known to the public. Therefore, in some museums, you can see the skeleton of Tuojiangosaurus on display, which was mounted following the old theory, and had no spines on the shoulders. This is because the researchers at the time did not know the location of the spines, so they were not installed onto the fossils for the time being. Good, the above concludes our introduction to Qichuan the Tuojiangosaurus. Thank you all.